Alright, so I'm doing another video in this series that I'm calling the intersection of taiko and Western drumming. And actually I'm going to call this video 1.5 because I want to kind of back up a little bit from the second video that I made and talk a little bit more about the articulations of Western drumming, in particular things like the flam and the buzz, press roll, maybe to some extent the diddle, but kind of didn't get into those too deeply in the other video, and I wanted to go back and talk about them a little bit more. So before I get into the rudiments and the flam and press roll, I want to talk a little bit about sound characteristics and musical instruments. So this is kind of important to understand, like what is the purpose of some of the rudiments. So sound characteristics, musical instruments have pitch, high, low, scales on a guitar or piano, timbre, which is sometimes referred to as color, the overtones, harmonics, and then when you describe how an instrument sounds or when it's played, what's the quality, sometimes talk about attack, sustain, resonance, and then decay of the sound. And then, of course, in Western drumming, we have what we call sticking, which is the hand order that you play when you're doing the different rudiments and combinations of phrases. So the reason why I wanted to talk about sustain, resonance, attack, those concepts, is one of the differences between percussion instruments and other musical instruments is that, of course, we can't play particular notes, so we don't really do scale, and we don't really do we can do high low, but we don't really do particular notes, as in on Western major minor scales, for example. And the instruments have timbre, and in drumming I think there's attack. There's not really sustain unless you do a drum roll, and that's why I wanted to talk about this. Obviously drums have resonance, and then the sound of the drum decays, so those apply to a drum. But sustain is the one that's kind of lacking. So when you're playing a drum, the only way you can sustain the sound of the drum is to do either a single stroke roll, for example, if you're on a timpani or even on a taiko, low sound, you do a fast single stroke roll, you sort of sustain that sound. Or on a snare drum, you would do a press or buzz roll, which is one of the rudiments that I didn't get into too deeply in the first two videos. So the reason why I want to go through this and then talk about the rudiments a little bit more is I think that you realize also when you're playing a drum, you maybe can hit two things at the same time when you've got two hands. Of course, if you're on a drum set, you've got your feet too, but when you're playing taiko, pretty much you've got your two hands. So unlike on a piano where you can hit a chord and you can play multiple notes at the same time, you really can only play two things at the same time. And again, as far as sustain goes, on piano you got the pedal that sustains the chord, but in drumming, really the only way to sustain something is to do a drum roll. So let's go back to the rudiments for a moment. I'm going to move my camera again, so pardon my moving this. So let's talk about sustain as far as percussion goes. If you have a cymbal, cymbals obviously when you hit them they're going to sustain a sound, right? So I'm going to hit the cymbal, right? So there's a certain amount of a sustain to that sound as the cymbal rings, and then it decays, right? On a drum, you have a fast attack, you have some resonance, you don't have a lot of sustain, right? So sustain on a drum is going to come from being able to do a drum roll, right? So if I want to sustain the sound of this taiko, I have to be able to do that kind of a single stroke roll, right? In symphonic drumming, press roll, that provides the sustain effect that about all you can get with a drum, right? You don't have a chord, a sustain pedal like on a piano where you hit a chord, you can just let it ring on and on. It doesn't happen with a drum. So you're gonna have to do a drum roll to sustain your sound, right? Okay. So the flam, one of the purposes of a flam, right? Remember we talked about flams are hitting two hands together, right? One of the purposes of a flam is that you can obviously hit two things. So when you're playing a piano or a guitar, you can strum or hit multiple notes and you can get more than one sound because you've got 10 fingers. Or on a guitar you've got the strings in your other hand, you've got 6 strings in your fingers on your other hand. On a taiko, really, you're just going to be able to hit two things. So a flam is what provides you with that ability to get two sounds. So if I just alternate my hands, right, so I'm changing pitch from high to low, but I'm only getting one sound at a time because I'm just using my hands in alternating fashion. A lot of taiko, traditional taiko, that's the way the sticking is, right? So remember, sticking is your hand order. Sticking is a lot of straight single sticking in taiko. In Western drumming, there's a lot of flams. And so that is really the benefit of a flam, is that rather than just getting this, I get... So the only way to get more than one sound at a time is to be able to learn the flam rudiments. So going forward with the video series that I'm doing, that's how I'm going to start applying some of these things. So, for example, to sustain a sound, maybe a press roll or a single, right, to sustain the low sound or the high sound. In terms of multiple sounds, again, all you have is a flam. Flam rudiment, you get two sounds at the same time. One hand on each sound, right? High, low, or I did the kane, did the bell before, but you can. This is how you could do it with a taiko. So that's how I'm going to explore the flam rudiments. How can you use one hand on one taiko and the other hand on another taiko, right? So this kind of thing. Apply flams into taiko playing. So that's video 1.5. So if you're looking at my videos in sequence, stick this one in between 1 and 2.